Lance Marshall was a hacker, not a criminal by choice, but by necessity. His skills with code and bypassing security systems had made him a legend in the dark corners of the net. But even legends fall, and the Galactic police had finally caught up with him. His arrest was swift, his trial brief, and his punishment harsh, to be sent to one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy, a place known only as Vorex 9, a world that few who entered ever returned from. But Lance wasn't one to back down from danger. He could have taken the prison sentence, sat in a cell for the next decade, but he chose the unknown, the risk. If he was going to be exiled, he might as well make it an adventure. Besides, he'd survived worse. The shuttle was a rusted hunk of metal, and its controls felt outdated. The journey would take years, but he didn't mind. He could lose himself in the vastness of space, perhaps disappear completely. But something went wrong during the journey, something he couldn't have predicted. The ship's engines sputtered, then shut down entirely. A jarring crash shook Lance out of his seat, throwing him forward into the control panel. Sparks flew, alarms blared, and the dark void of space outside became a blur of stars. He gripped the side of the seat, teeth clenched. "Shit," he muttered, desperately trying to regain control. But it was no use. The ship was plummeting, out of control. A violent tremor ran through the ship as it entered the atmosphere of an unknown planet. The hull groaned, bending and screeching as it made a rough landing, debris scattering as the shuttle crashed into soft but dense vegetation. Smoke and dust filled the cockpit. But Lance, surprisingly unhurt, scrambled out of his seat, heart racing. He stumbled to the hatch, pushing it open to reveal a lush, vibrant world. The air smelled sweet and foreign, the planet's skyline glowing with structures that looked like they belonged in a dream. Towering trees with purple leaves swayed gently, and there was something almost ethereal about the place. Lance wiped the sweat from his brow, realizing his ship was too damaged to take off again. His escape plan had crashed, quite literally. He had no choice but to explore. Maybe find help. Maybe find a way off this world. But as he stepped forward, he noticed something odd. The planet was beautiful. The air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers and fruit trees. Strange creatures darted through the air, flying lizards with iridescent scales and humanoid figures hidden in the shadows. But what caught his eye most were the women. Tall, graceful, and impossibly beautiful, they moved with a calm authority. Their clothes, simple yet elegant, seemed to shimmer in the warm light. They walked with purpose, eyes scanning the surroundings, their long, flowing hair glinting like the stars themselves. Lance could only stand there, mesmerized. He didn't know where he was, but he had the sudden, undeniable feeling that he'd landed on the wrong side of the galaxy. This planet was ruled by these women, and from the looks of things, they were not the sort of people you would want to cross. A figure approached from the crowd, the others stepping aside in silent reverence. The woman had long silver hair, piercing violet eyes, and a confident posture. There was a fire in her gaze, something sharp and predatory. She was wearing a sleek, form-fitting suit that accentuated her statuesque frame, and the subtle smile on her lips was far from comforting. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Her voice was soft, but there was a dangerous edge to it. Lance swallowed hard, suddenly feeling very small. My ship crashed. I need help," he stammered, trying to sound confident, though he knew there was little chance of him escaping her judgment. The woman stepped closer, her eyes scanning him from head to toe with a calculating look. "You're far from home, Earthman," she said, her tone dripping with amusement. "What makes you think you can wander onto our world and not be evaluated?" Lance didn't know whether to be intimidated or intrigued. Something told him this wasn't just a simple rescue mission. He was in dangerous territory, and these women were not to be underestimated. "Please," he tried again, his voice firmer this time. "I just need to fix my ship and leave. I mean no harm." She tilted her head, considering him. "Fix your ship? I don't think it's that simple. You've stumbled into a place where your kind is very interesting. I think you'll find that we take great interest in all visitors from foreign worlds." Her smile widened. The woman's gaze lingered on Lance, and for a moment, the air between them thickened with an unspoken tension. She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing slightly as she measured him, almost as if sizing up a piece of rare, unfamiliar prey. The crowd behind her parted, and one of the women, a younger, more petite figure, stepped forward, holding a sleek communication device in her hand. "You're lucky your ship crash-landed here, Earthman," the silver-haired woman finally said, her voice smooth and calculated. "But this will not be a rescue mission. You will do something for us first." Lance raised an eyebrow. "I'm not interested in becoming a servant or running errands for you." The woman's lips curled into a knowing smile. "Oh, it's much more than that. Your presence here is intriguing. We will put your skills to the test, and you will either rise to the challenge or you'll be discarded, like so many others who dared cross our borders." Lance frowned but said nothing. His mind was racing. He hadn't bargained for a test or a task. He had simply hoped for a quick exit, but it was clear now that his fate was tied to this planet in ways he hadn't expected. The silver-haired woman waved her hand in the air, and the petite woman handed over the device. "We have a job for you. There's a man, an important individual, who has been captured by a rival faction on the other side of the planet. We need you to infiltrate their territory and bring him back. You will be accompanied by two of my best operatives. They will assist you, guide you, and ensure your success." Lance didn't like the sound of that. Two operatives meant more than just a simple rescue. It meant something else. Something he wasn't sure he could escape. "You'll be given everything you need," the silver-haired woman continued, eyes glinting with amusement. "But fail, and you will regret it. You'll never leave this planet." Lance bit back the retort, forming in his mind. This wasn't a choice. It was an ultimatum. "Understood," he muttered. The woman smiled, satisfaction glimmering in her violet eyes. "Good. You leave immediately." The journey to the rival territory was long and treacherous, taking them through dense jungles, across barren deserts, and over jagged mountain ranges. Lance traveled in the company of two women, Lyra, a tall, lithe woman with raven-black hair and dark eyes, and Vera, who was smaller but no less striking, with cascading auburn locks and a mischievous glint in her green eyes. From the moment they boarded their transport ship, Lance sensed that this mission was more than just about rescuing some captive. The way the two women looked at him, eyes smoldering, smiles lingering a moment too long, told him everything he needed to know. They were testing him. Lyra and Vera were beautiful, undeniably so. They wore form-fitting suits designed to accentuate their figures, and their every movement was graceful, purposeful. The tension between them and Lance was palpable. The first few days of travel were relatively calm. The three of them would share quiet meals in the ship's small galley, but there was an underlying current of attraction that made every exchange feel charged. Lance tried to keep his distance, focusing on the mission and his resolve to get through this as quickly as possible. But the women had their ways of breaking down defenses. One evening, as the ship passed through a dense nebula, Vera sat beside him, her scent intoxicating, a mixture of citrus and something floral. She leaned in, her shoulder brushing against his. "You know," she said softly, her voice almost a purr, "this whole thing doesn't have to be so difficult." Lance glanced at her, keeping his face neutral. "I'm here to do a job, not play games." She smiled, her lips curving up slowly, the same glint of mischief in her eyes. "But isn't the challenge of the game what makes it fun?" Lyra joined them then, sitting across from Lance. She didn't say anything at first but watched him, her eyes unblinking. The silence grew thick as she leaned forward slightly, almost daring him to speak. "Isn't it tempting?" she asked finally, her voice a silky whisper. "To just let go? There's no need to resist, Lance. Not when we could make this journey much more enjoyable for you." Her words slid under his skin like a touch. Lance knew they weren't just offering companionship. They were offering something more, something dangerous. "I'm not interested in your games," he replied firmly, even though part of him wondered if he could resist the pull they had on him. He wasn't some naive fool. He'd seen enough of the world to know what they were doing. This was a test of his control, and he wasn't about to fail it. But every night the temptation grew harder to resist. Lyra would often sit beside him during their downtime, her body close enough that he could feel the heat radiating off her. Vera would touch his arm casually, her fingertips brushing over his skin as she passed by, and each time it became more difficult to keep his focus. On the fifth night, Lyra cornered him in the small observation deck, her movements fluid and deliberate. She stepped into his personal space, close enough that he could feel her breath on his neck, sending a shiver down his spine.
"You're a man of discipline, aren't you?" she murmured, her lips brushing his ear. "But I wonder how long that will last, under pressure." Before Lance could respond, Vera appeared in the doorway, her eyes flicking between them, a knowing smile spreading across her face. "You're not one to let temptation rule you, I see," she said. "But everyone has their breaking point, Lance, and we're here to push you to yours." The closer they got to the rival territory, the more intense their seduction became. Every moment in the ship was charged with an energy that both terrified and thrilled him. He could feel his resolve slipping even as he continued to hold firm, reminding himself that he wasn't here for pleasure, he was here to do a job. When they finally arrived at the enemy stronghold, a vast, heavily fortified city in the middle of a dry, desolate wasteland, Lance had one focus: the mission. Lyra and Vera, however, had their own agendas. They had led him this far, sure, but their flirtations and subtle manipulations continued. As they infiltrated the enemy base, evading guards and disabling security systems, Lance had to admit that the women were skilled. Their beauty was a weapon, but their brains were even more dangerous.
Yet, despite everything, Lance managed to keep his mind on the task at hand. He wasn't here for their games. He was here to rescue the man who would be the key to getting off this planet, and he was going to succeed. The final confrontation occurred in the heart of the enemy compound, where Lance and his team faced resistance from heavily armed guards. In the heat of the battle, he worked with Lyra and Vera seamlessly, though he could feel their presence pressing against him, distracting him in ways he hadn't anticipated. As they reached the captured man, his blue eyes locking with Lance's, he whispered, "I didn't think you'd make it." Lance smirked but didn't answer. The mission was complete, and as they made their way back to their ship, the two women remained close. They had pushed him to his limits, tested his every boundary, but Lance had held firm. For now. The journey back to the Queen's capital was quiet, the weight of the mission's success hanging in the air like a thick fog. Lance couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed during his time on this planet. He had gone from being a prisoner, an exiled hacker, to a man with the potential to make something more of his future. He had completed the mission, and the Queen was pleased, perhaps even impressed. When they returned to the palace, the Queen, in all her regal beauty, welcomed them back with a lavish feast. Her silvery hair shimmered like moonlight, and her violet eyes seemed to glow with an intensity that could melt anyone under its gaze. As the celebration wound down and the last of the wine was poured, the Queen, a woman of both immense beauty and power, turned to Lance with a thoughtful smile. "You've done well, Earthman," she said, her voice both warm and commanding. "You've proven yourself. I can see that you have a strength of character and discipline, though I wonder for how long that will last." Lance raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this conversation was going. "I did what was asked of me. Now I just need my ship fixed so I can leave." The Queen chuckled softly, a sound that sent a shiver down his spine. "You believe I would offer you only a ship and a simple escape? You've earned more than that, Lance Marshall." She leaned forward, her gaze never leaving his. "I can offer you a ship, a beautiful high-tech vessel that will carry you wherever you desire to go. But in exchange?" She paused, letting the tension linger. Lance could feel his pulse quicken. He was no fool. He knew what she was implying, and a part of him understood the deal she was offering. She wasn't just offering a ship. She was offering a night with her, a night that could be more than just a transaction. There was something dangerous about her, something tempting. "What's the catch?" Lance asked, though he already knew the answer. The Queen smiled, her eyes glowing like twin stars. "There is no catch, Lance. A single night in my company, and you will have a ship of your own. I will see to it that you are free to roam the galaxy as you wish, without fear of anyone hunting you down. You will be untouchable." Lance felt his resolve waver. He wasn't an innocent man. He had known the world of deals and compromises, and this wasn't much different. The temptation was there. No woman had ever made him feel the way she did. And yet he hesitated. One night, he said slowly, his voice almost a whisper, for a ship. That's your offer? The Queen's smile deepened, like a secret only she knew. Yes, one night, but it will be more than just an exchange. It will be an experience you will not forget. The night came sooner than Lance expected. The Queen led him to a private, ornate chamber high in the palace, a place where the stars outside seemed to be close enough to touch. The walls were adorned with intricate patterns of silver and violet, and the air was thick with the sweet scent of rare flowers. Lance was dressed in a simple dark tunic, but the Queen, she was a vision. She wore a gown of deep midnight blue that shimmered as she moved, and her eyes locked on his with an intensity that left him breathless. You've done well, Lance, but tonight, you will know what it means to truly experience the stars. With a single touch, she cupped his face, her fingers cool against his skin, before pulling him into a kiss. It was unlike any kiss he had ever felt, fiery yet tender, full of control and an overwhelming pull. It was a kiss that spoke of power, of promises whispered in the dark. The night unfolded slowly, and every moment felt like an eternity. They spoke little, but their bodies did the talking. The Queen showed him a world of pleasure and intimacy that he had never thought possible. Her hands were skilled, and every touch was deliberate. Each kiss, each caress, was calculated to push him to the edge, but never quite over it. Lance, for once, let go of his control. He could feel the tension he'd held for so long melting away under her touch. He had resisted, but now in this moment, he gave in. And she took everything he had to give, guiding him into a night of passion that felt like a dream, but was all too real. By the time the night ended, the two of them lay together, their bodies entangled, the stars above them shining like distant memories. The Queen turned to him, her lips curling into a satisfied smile. You were more than I expected, Earthman. I find that I'm intrigued by you, but you must leave now as promised. Your ship will be waiting. Lance, his mind clouded with the remnants of their intimate encounter, nodded. I'll go, but this night, he paused, searching for the right words. This night was, something else. You'll find, she said softly, that the galaxy holds more wonders for you than you ever imagined. With the Queen's promise fulfilled, Lance was given a sleek, advanced starship, the Nebula Strider, its engines purring with power. As he prepared to leave the planet, he looked back at the Queen one last time. Her gaze was cool, unreadable, but there was a hint of something softer beneath it, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had shared. The stars called to him, just as they always had, and Lance was ready to answer. The galaxy was vast, and there were more adventures to be had, more women to meet, and more connections to forge. He traveled from planet to planet, each one more exotic than the last. On a tropical moon, he met Yara, a dancer from a nomadic tribe. Her lithe body moved with the rhythm of the waves, and her laughter was like music. She invited him to spend the night by the fire, their bodies entwined as the wind whispered through the trees. On a city-covered world where towering skyscrapers reached for the clouds, he met Alara, a brilliant scientist working to unlock the secrets of quantum energy. Their bond was more intellectual than physical, but the chemistry was undeniable. They shared hours of conversation, exploring both the limits of the universe and the hidden depths of one another. On a war-torn planet, he found Zira, a fierce fighter who led a rebel group against a tyrannical regime. She was strong, driven, and as fierce in the bedroom as she was on the battlefield. She taught him the art of survival, and in return, he showed her what it meant to trust someone completely. With every new planet, every new face, Lance found himself losing pieces of his former self. He was no longer just the hacker who had been exiled. He was something more, an explorer of both worlds and hearts, driven by an insatiable curiosity and a deep yearning to connect. But as the years passed and his journeys led him deeper into the galaxy, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The Queen had given him freedom, but the price had been more than just a night in her bed. There was a sense of longing, an ache in his chest that no woman, no adventure could fill. In the end, Lance Marshall would continue his journey, never fully satisfied, but always searching. Because in the vastness of space, where the stars stretched endlessly before him, he knew there was one thing he would always seek: the next experience, the next connection, and the next adventure in the arms of the women who ruled the cosmos.